All right, and welcome to my actual review of Wayfinder. I've currently finished the game, uh, including the previous early access. I have 200 some hours in this game at this point. Some of those I might have been saying AFK though. I wouldn't necessarily rely on that. But so, what do I think of Wayfinder? Well, I'll start this out kind of short, sweet, simple. If you have any interest in this game, any interest in like an ARPG, character action game at all, any part of this game looks interesting to you, buy this game. This game costs $25. And I can tell you just because literally have a Let's Play series and I can multiply the episodes. Uh, this is a polished. There's a few little corners we can tell it's an indie game. There's some leftover stuff, but uh, very polished ARPG action combat game, whatever you want to call it. Running almost 50 hours, probably closer to 70 or 80 if you want to actually go in and complete anything. And it costs $25. In a year where we have live service games that want you to spend $50, twice that a month on them. We've even just single games that are going for like $95 and stuff. That's Dragon's Dogma I'm referencing there. Canadian dollars for that one. But so yeah, this game highly gets my recommendation. Now, if you aren't into the whole loot grinding, building stuff, and you don't want to just, you can still enjoy it as a character action game, but you'd probably have to look up someone's build and try and copy it. That's the one caveat I will make there. Don't jump into this just figuring you're going to play Devil May Cry or God of War and not have to think about your build at all. To some extent, that applies to those games. I know some of them have RPG elements. But yeah, this game is a hard recommend. Don't even need to think about it. $25, like, I'm not going to put in $25 at nothing, but $25 is what I spend on DoorDash in a week. So that's trade that 4 topping large pizza in and grab this game. So moving on from there. All right, so just a quick review of what Wayfinder is for you. I do have an entire separate video of that, which I'll put down in the description if I go into more detail. But Wayfinder is very much a Diablo or Path of Exile style game, with the exception that there's more of a character action combat gameplay to it. So you go through dungeons, kind of repeating them and repeating boss fights like you would in a Diablo or Path of Exile game. I call those loot RPGs. Looter RPGs, essentially. Not a term that's popularized, but I keep trying anyways. But yeah, you have combat that would be more comparable to Darksiders is going to be the obvious one because of Joe Medura's involvement in art style, but yeah, you could argue for God of War, different things like that. The game it's most specifically close to is Remnant from the Ashes, but not. It doesn't really get so much into the Souls-like stuff, or particularly trying to bust your balls, being hard type situation. One critique of the game actually might be that it's kind of easy, but that will vary from different people. Some people may be looking for that because a lot of games in the RPG and ARPG space are taking that Dark Souls cue, and often take that Dark Souls cue as just we must be incredibly difficult or tight or whatever. Towards the end of the game, you also will get a little bit of Monster Hunter when you're doing all those final weapon and Wayfinder upgrades. There's a lot of go fight the boss, get its pearl or tooth or whatever it is, and essence and so on. The game is generally split up. You either run through random dungeons, which do include outdoor spaces as well, that are procedurally generated, and fight smaller mini bosses at the end to farm up loot and resources. Or you go into the big bad boss fights to get the super good drops and things like that, and the main parts to upgrade your weapons and Wayfinders. There are There's 7 Wayfinders. I should have wrote this down in my notes, but I didn't. Wingrave, Silo, Nis, Kairos, Venomous, Senja, Grendel. There are 8 Wayfinders. That doesn't seem like a lot if you're comparing this to something like Overwatch, of course, or a hero shooter generally. I'm not too into hero shooters, so I don't have too many examples. But when you compare it back to Diablo or Path of Exile, Diablo has 6 characters slash classes, and Path of Exile has 5. That's the style of game. So there's a lot more diversity to them. You do always have your 4 set abilities and your set passive, but those abilities have upgrades and you can take them in different ways. Like I have the Kairos tank builds on the channel if you want, which is different from just an ability magic nuking Kairos as well. You do also get elements like your weapons change. You get your weapon, which changes your playstyle. Just generally speaking, and every single weapon in the game has a different active ability of its own. On top of that, your character will have at least 2, sometimes 3 options to get passive powers that are generally acquired from bosses. And towards the end of the game, you start getting the power to use the game's imbuement system to buff yourself, which can go really insanely hardcore with how powerful you can be. Moving on from that, we're going to jump over to a few pros and cons type situation. So pros, obviously I mentioned the price point. This $25 game is an absolute steal. This could easily have been sold as a $30 or $50 game. Some might even make the argument for the whole 60. I'm not going to, but the economy sucks right now, so I'm not going to. I kind of went over the combat, but yeah, the combat is tight, it's snappy, it has been upgraded drastically if you did play the previous early access MMO version. Also, not running on an MMO server seems to have actually helped it out with stuff like latency and things like that. The combat can be very in-depth. You're going to always have your ups and downs, and everyone has their different favorite boss and their different most hated boss and things like that. Generally speaking, you're going to be you can tank, you can dodge, you've got different options like that. It's very as I said, I've said snappy several times, haven't I? Combat gets an excellent rating. Very rarely have I felt screwed by the combat anyway. There's maybe 1 or 2 enemies that seem to have weird hitboxes, but uh, I've already mentioned you can mix and match your builds to an extreme amount. There's a lot of different options there, different build craft going on for you. The game is multiplayer. There's not automatic matchmaking, but you can find parties, you can join other people's parties, you can invite people, including crossplay. Crossplay is still, a selling point, not a basic feature in 2024, which baffles me, but this game has crossplay. Currently between PlayStation and PC, soon TM to be on Xbox. No plans for Switch, though. They've said it just doesn't work out unless they get all the money and hire whoever those guys are. They're really good at porting Switch games, maybe. And then the boss fights. Now your mileage is going to vary on the boss fights. The ones at the end of the regular expeditions are just bigger, spongy, bigger versions of regular enemies for the most part. But when the game wants to throw in a boss fight, it does go pretty all out. You obviously start off with some pretty basic ones, but towards the end, you're doing full-on God of War stuff, fighting like a primal tree god and hookshotting around it and stuff. There are variations to that. Obviously, your opinions may differ depending on the boss, depending on your personal playstyle. Some of them may just be aggravating to you. So, moving on from that, I'll hit a couple of the negative points. One is there is some leftover MMO stuff in the game. You'll run into a few quests, and there is the job board and patrols where it's just like go kill 30 bears or 30 rats, something like that. Mostly, I think that's why would you take it out? But it's not interesting content in any way. It also by the time you get unlocked, you're usually max leveling your main character, I found. And by interviewing other people, I've also found, or talking to other people. So you get a little of that. It comes with the territory of redoing the whole game over to be a more single shot experience than a MMO, but it's kind of strange. They also have public events that spawn on timers. It's kind of weird because if you're trying to find a specific event, it's not always there in the open world zones, and that can be kind of annoying. But the other kind of downside I would say is some of the mutators I mentioned, you eventually get the ability to turn them into buffs later on, but some of the ones you mutators and you do have to use them because they're required for both the mythic hunts at the end of the game to actually get the full rewards and to get some of the materials to upgrade your wayfinders, particularly. Some of them, the jump out one is the fire bombs. If you watch the Let's Play at all or some of my shorts clips, they don't feel particularly good or integrated with the combat system. The fire bombs, particularly, uh, cover the floor in fire, spawn randomly on top of you, and a big thing with the mutators is if you are playing multiplayer, you get the bombs, for instance, for all players. So suddenly instead of three bombs leaving zones of fire on the floor, you've suddenly got 15 bombs spawning every 90 seconds or whatever it is. It can very quickly, particularly in a boss fight, heavily disrupt the mechanics and make the fight feel kind of unfair. There are ways to counteract that, particularly in multiplayer if you have good healers and things, but it's definitely one I feel like there's still some tweaks they could make to that, and they do still have at least one more major quality of life patch coming out, so we'll keep an eye on that. And then yes, before I get insanely long here, we'll just wrap it up. I've talked. You can go look at some of my thoughts videos from early access for a lot of this as well. Final summary. Again, I heavily recommend this game. If you're into anything in that genre, be it Diablo, Path of Exile, Remnant, which I mentioned, Outriders, even something like Destiny, and to some extent Warframe, this is definitely somewhat of a different game from Warframe because Warframe doesn't have really Warframe doesn't have randomized loot so much, or the same style progression. Monster Hunter is another one that comes up more towards the end of the game. The early part of the game does not necessarily feel like Monster Hunter, but you can draw a lot of parallels. You do go out on, you can get missions in Monster Hunter where you don't actually go fight monster, but it's not the part anyone in the part of the game anyone remembers. Uh, Final score, I'm going to drop a 9 out of 10. The biggest one is some of those mutators. That definitely does knock the game down a notch. That they are heavily because they are heavily integrated. If they were to patch those up, I'd probably even put this into the 9.5. There's definitely the rough edges. I will give them all the credit in the world for not abandoning the game when the publisher dipped, because we've seen so many live service games like over the last year, 2 years. Oh, the game's out. Oh no, the game's kind of sort of struggling. Let's just abandon it. Anthem. That's the biggest example in the last few years. That game just immediately got dropped and it was gone. There's other ones that aren't gone, but they've been put into maintenance modes. I think Exoprimal is one of those. All that sort of stuff. So I give a lot of credit to Airship for not abandoning the game. They've stood by their product. They have done an immense amount of work to turn a live service game into a not a live service game and actually get the thing out the door. They haven't really sold a DLC or additional microtransactions to push it out the door either. They've kept the $25 price point, which is insane. That it's not more than that. There is support. They do have a supporter pack currently partnered with Critical Role that you can buy to support the game, but it's just some additional cosmetics. It's not any actual content as the specific game goes. And they've been also pretty transparent and clear about expectations. They've said currently don't expect additional, like we're not going to put out a roadmap that we're then going to abandon. It's going to be entirely, we're and generally not going to promise anything until we've actually got on the table almost ready to be delivered. And a lot of transparency, very much like Warframe and Digital Extremes, which is who they were, well, who were partnered with. They were partnered with Digital Extremes Publishing, though, which is not one for one with Digital Extremes, and Digital Extremes Publishing doesn't exist anymore. If you're looking at my absolute personal taste, this is actually a contender for my game of the year. I still have to finish out Core Keeper and kind of figure out my thoughts on a couple of other games. But it's definitely a front runner there. Uh, I know I'm really turning into an indie YouTuber, I guess we'll say with that. But yeah, this game's pretty high up there, even with some of its flaws. So again, a high recommendation for this game. It is an exceptionally good value if you've got any interest in the genre or style of this game at all at the $25 mark. And that's about all. We'll wrap up the review here. If you found this informative, drop a like. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. We got lots of content here for Wayfinder and for other things. We got, at the moment, Warframe, Subnautica, Core Keeper, the tail end of Prince of Persia. There's some other stuff upcoming too. I may have mentioned one or two of them already in this review, but this isn't an advertisement for my channel. It's a review of the game. If you subscribe to the channel, I'm pretty good posting the intended updates. That's all. Thanks for watching. Thanks for checking out the review. I know I'm definitely not the biggest channel to be checking a review on here. I'm not Skill Up or anyone else like that. I forget what Skill Up's review of the game was, and I don't think he has reviewed the 1.0 version. But anyways, thanks for watching. We'll wrap it up here. Have a good one. Enjoy your day. Hopefully, we'll see you in the game. If you do want to check out, if you join the Discord, that's usually a good way to keep up when I'm playing the game and do LFG type stuff. I also do hang out on the main Wayfinder Discord as well and answer questions there. All right,